Hello and welcome to the CephaloPOD, your go-to podcast for the latest news in FIRST Robotics, FTC, and whatever else we decide to talk about. Hosted by FTC Team 6165, the MSET Cuttlefish. I'm Riya, and today I'm joined by...
I'm Alan.
I'm Aryan.
And I'm Trevor.
And on today's episode, we are going to start off with a topic that I think is on everybody's mind, which is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're recording this on March 10th, which is just a few days shy of the one-year anniversary that our local county went into COVID lockdown. And so, obviously, it's been quite a while. How do you guys feel after a full year of lockdown?
I mean, lockdown just kind of seems normal now. Kind of hesitant to go back to in-person because, of course, pandemic issues, but also I feel like there's going to be a lot more schoolwork, which I don't want to do.
I didn't even realize it's been almost a year, I guess, because, staying at home, it's been so, monotonous. It's kind of all blends together. But, yeah, we're, I think 3 days shy of a year since school closed.
Yeah, I think what Alan said about how this being the new normal was spot on, right? After a year, we've all kind of adapted to doing everything virtually, right? So now going in person seems like a luxury more than the normal.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that one of the effects of going virtual, obviously, it's had a huge impact on us, in terms of robotics, but I think that virtual school aspect has definitely been really interesting. And so for context, for those of you who don't know us who are listening to the podcast, the MSET Cuttlefish, we are a school-affiliated team, and so one of the biggest difficulties, I think, for us as a robotics team specifically, has really been adapting to realizing that even though the first world continues to go on in some format and people are still building robots, because we are affiliated with a school, we do have to make sure that we are complying with school policy and figuring out how to navigate the school itself being virtual. So that's definitely been pretty interesting to deal with for the last year, but it is pretty wild. It has been a full year since that happened. And now we're going to go into kind of our first weekly segment, which is just going to be discussing kind of the latest and first news and what's been going on. And I think the biggest story that actually was released today is that Worlds has been canceled at both the Houston and Detroit location for the 2020-2021 season. And so Worlds was also canceled last year, which I know was a huge bummer, but I think 2 years in a row, how do you guys feel? I know for me, I'm kind of conflicted between feeling like I kind of should have expected this, and it almost feels like, yeah, of course there's no Worlds. There was no Worlds last year either. But at the same time, I feel like you can't help but be a little bit disappointed. I don't really know.
I mean, I feel like disappointment is what a lot of FTC teams are going to be feeling right now, especially when they have canceled it 4 months in advance. With the situation seemingly returning to normal. I guess the Texas mandate has been some effect because Houston is in Texas, and the no mask mandate is kind of a not very good during a pandemic, but still it's kind of disappointing. Like, a lot of the motivation is kind of gone because aiming to Worlds is something all FTC teams, I think, aspire to go. But I'm just hoping here that Mti is going to be in person. So hopefully we can look forward to that.
Alan, do you want to quickly define what Mti is for those of us that might not know?
Oh, yeah. So it's the Maryland Tech Invitational, which is held during the summer. It's basically Worlds, except you have to actually apply. And it's basically like a gathering of all world-level teams. So hopefully we can get us up to that.
Yeah, I think that, now that schools are starting to reopen, vaccines are coming out, we kind of just started to go into the positive with COVID. And then now with this large blow, it's like we made so much progress going forward. It's a huge step back.
Yeah, I'm definitely disappointed that Worlds has been canceled, but I'm pretty optimistic about what some of the independently organized events might end up as, because the summer's still a long way away, and hopefully by then we'll be able to start doing some more in-person stuff. So, yeah, I am hopeful about Mti, and I found out today that the FTC Discord is trying to host a large virtual tournament at this point, but, who knows, maybe that we'll see that in person. Because we're not the only ones, feeling this way. There are, hundreds of other teams who have also been wanting to go to in-person competitions, so I think that that hope will lead to something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think those independently organized events are really interesting. And I think that's really the the first community is so big that there's always somebody who's coming up with a way to like adapt to certain situations. But I think that it's also really cool to see that even if you're feeling like super disappointed, there's always people you can talk to who are feeling the same way. And yeah, I think Aryan bring up a good point with MTI being an independently organized event, that Discord championship being independent as well. And I think you'll start to see a lot more local scrimmages getting planned in different areas that are maybe a little bit further along in the vaccination process or that are starting to open up a little bit more. And that'll be really cool to see in the future. But I think one other impact of, because Worlds was originally pushed to July from April, and then it was canceled. And so I think another effect of that has been that all the regional competitions have also been pushed out. And so I know for us in Northern California, our regional competition is usually either like the end of February or the beginning of March, but now it's actually the first weekend of May. And so what do you guys feel about that? Because I know that extra time was given so that teams would have more time to prepare, but how has that had an impact on you? Maybe in terms of the season being super long, or how that's conflicted with other things that you have on your schedule?
I think that like I'm kind of conflicted about regionals being pushed so much because on one hand I feel like we're so used to preparing for March that we now feel like we have a lot of time where we're kind of just like looking for things to do until then. But then on the other hand, there's always like this time always offers like more opportunities to improve our robot and expand our outreach. Plus, I think eventually, like, looking back at this year, it'll be nicer to like have had the robotic season spread out over longer because, last year after it ended for us it was March. It like felt like something was missing after that because we'd spend so much time from September through March. So I think, there's definitely a bright side to having regionals in May.
I'm still hoping that regionals might be in person, or it might be some like hybrid version, like what Chesapeake is doing. That would be interesting because I definitely want to have some in-person matches at least, because the dynamic between in-person and remote seems a lot different, especially with remote just meta being either you're having sticks or your return rack modifications and stuff like that. It's definitely more interesting to see in-person matches. But I also feel like the season getting pushed back is also kind of bad because, of course, May 1st is that weekend right before AP tests, and then having regionals right then, and also AP tests coming up is kind of a lot to do. So I feel like that aspect is just kind of worse. But still, having the longer season, having more time to work on your robot, having just generally more time to do things is a huge benefit.
I guess from a management perspective, it doesn't feel too different, right? Because outreach is a year-long process, both off-season and on-season. So with regionals being pushed back, it's just that like our deadlines are being pushed back a little bit.
Yeah, and actually I want to build upon Aryan's point, where you're saying like it doesn't feel like there's as much to do. So as a team, like what have you guys felt like you've been doing with the with all this extra time, right? Or I guess for some people maybe it's not extra time because their season got started a little bit later, but how do you feel that if you're speaking to another team that was saying like, man, I really feel like I have all this time and we don't know what to do, but we want to improve, what would you say to them? Like, what would you recommend?
I feel like there's always outreach opportunities that you guys can do. Our team has created multiple outreach initiatives because of like COVID and some of our members having more time. For example, our software team coded an iOS and an Apple and app for both Play Store and iOS called Team Track for FTC scoring and scouting. Download now.
Thanks for the plug, Trevor. Yeah, and I think that one thing that, and this is something that our coach says to us all the time, but there's never too much time to perfect auto or to driver practice. And I think that's something that was especially true when we were in person, because I feel like in-person competitions had this randomness aspect to it where things would just randomly break down, small changes in maybe the texture of the floor or the air density or something could cause issues for your robot in competition. Obviously I meant that as a joke, but I also kind of didn't mean that as a joke. And so there is something to be said about really just making sure that you practice as much as you can, you stress test as much as you can, so that once it comes to competition time, less of those errors are occurring. But then there is Alan's point about if regionals is also going to be virtual, and for pretty much for everybody at this point, regionals or your state competition is the very highest you can go. I mean, it's a little demotivating, but we'll hit on that topic a little bit later. So that's pretty much, I know we've gone on for a little bit about just that world cancellation thing, but I guess those are our opinions on that. Those are our feelings. Don't add us for it. But now we're going to go into kind of the bulk of what today's podcast is about, which is just about complying with FTC during COVID. So obviously that is kind of what we just talked about, but this is more talking about just the day-to-day of what it's like to do robotics during COVID, and how, even though this is coming out a full year after we went into lockdown, how teams can continue to adapt to COVID if it's still an issue in your area, or what we can kind of learn and take from this whole experience into the future. And so the first thing I want to talk about is just COVID policy in terms of social distancing and how long you can be in groups and stay together and be indoors and all of that, and how that has affected our meetings. So for context, we are from Northern California, and so we did go into an almost full lockdown at the very start of the COVID pandemic in the United States. And so the policies we were first adhering to was that we couldn't work indoors. We could only have about 4 people working together, socially distant, with masks, outside for about 4 hours a week on school campus. So it was actually, in my opinion, still pretty generous considering that there was a global pandemic, and I'm really obviously grateful to our administration for kind of trusting us with that, but then also giving us the space to work. But how did it feel to you guys to have to change the meeting structure completely? Because I know we used to meet a lot more than 4 hours a week with a lot more than 4 people at a time. So how was that adjustment?
I mean, it was kind of hard because the meetings before were definitely more fun. We used to have all these night meetings from like 7 to 9, and then we'd have food and stuff, and it would be like team bonding plus like robotic stuff, but like you'd actually get like maybe like 30 minutes of work in. But like now I feel like we'd have to like push ourselves to be a lot more productive because we only have 4 hours. But of course, our meeting times have improved. We have gone to like, I don't know, 8 hours now, but still it's definitely not the same as before. I would rather have the before meetings because COVID just generally sucks. Yeah, it's not that great.
Yeah, I think definitely like this year has affected me with the meetings quite a lot. Like I'm, historically a hardware member but I haven't done hardware with the robot in 3 months. So it's definitely changed the way I've the way I contribute to the team. Like I focused more on outreach and just like remote things, such as working with other teams on their hardware, like trying to advise, just keeping myself in that hardware realm without being able to come in. But yeah, it's the structure this year is also like very different. Like what Alan was saying, it was the night meetings were really fun last year, and for me, I was able to, like for most weekdays, I was able to just like dip into the room for 30 minutes or an hour when I had time and just like work on something that needed to be done on the robot any day. So that was nice. It was a good way to stay productive. But I think at least like one upside of the meetings this year is that like with our restrictions, we've become a little bit more effective with our time. Like because it's limited, we make sure to stay focused and get as much as we can done. I think that'll help us next year.
Yeah, so Alan, I know you brought up that last year there was a lot of like that implicit team bonding that just came from kind of the randomness of the meetings or the more relaxed structure or being able to eat food together. And I actually want to ask Trevor specifically, because I know that you haven't been able to be on campus at all. You haven't been able to be as involved with maybe the physical side of hardware and the team and whatnot. And so how have you felt about the lack of either formal or informal team bonding and kind of your connection to the team?
Yeah, so like obviously, right, not being able to go in, it sucks. With all these COVID restrictions, but I feel like I think one of the hardest parts about management this year is like doing the portfolio, doing the notebook all remotely. Because normally in an in-person setting, we'd be able to sit down like in a room with a bunch of people working on it, and even though you're still writing out in this exact same content, you have other people to talk with. It's a lot easier. Whereas virtually now, it's a lot more challenging. But I feel like through some of the outreach initiatives we've had, we've definitely been able to do some team bonding with like our robot presentations and stuff.
Yeah, and so talking about working with other people, like how, I know for, obviously as a member of the Drive team who has been able to go in person, I've bonded the most with the other couple of people that have been around, but for those of you that spent more time virtually, how has that been? How have you been able to connect with team members specifically?
Yeah, I think like some of the better ways that we were able to bond like virtually is through the outreach events. I mentioned some, but I'll talk a little bit about them more in detail. Like for example, in our club we have 2 sister rookie FTC teams that we help out a lot with like presentation practice and like helping them with their portfolio. And usually we have a couple members of our team go there. So like while we're kind of talking to them about our experiences in FTC in previous years and even this year in like competitions we've gone to, by sharing these stories, right, we're able to bond. Similarly, we've done a couple of virtual robot presentations, and with like the presentations and Q&A, we're still able to have like the normal banter with each other, albeit virtually.
I guess for me, I've been able to connect with team members like more over like Slack and online these days because, like what Trevor was saying with the non-technical things we work on, usually, we're just in the room with a bunch of people working on things. Everyone can has access to what they need. But now it's like we might have to source pictures from one person or videos from another, and it's a different kind of communication, but there still is some, and it still helps us collaboratively work to achieve our goals.
Yeah, and I think one other thing is, obviously because we had a lot less time to work in person, like Alan brought up, we've had to do a lot of CADing for the robot, and I think that one way we were able to, or at least I was able to really connect with a lot of people was through either teaching maybe newer members of our team how to CAD or working on different assignments with other people, because I think that was a really cool opportunity that usually when you're CADing a part, you just kind of retreat to your own little dungeon and make the part and leave, come out. But I think it was cool to see how CAD could almost be collaborative. If people were working on the same subsystem, then you can get a call and you can CAD your parts together and talk about how they're going to integrate. I think that's something that I never realized for sure before COVID, but that because of COVID, I might start implementing a lot more in my engineering life from now on. And so that's kind of it on COVID policy during meetings, but I think the biggest difference, and this is something we've talked about a lot now, but is that remote competition aspect. Because I think, at least for me, my favorite part of FTC competitions has always been being in person and being with other people and getting to meet other teams and other people, and just the energy in the, I guess, gymnasium during competitions is always just so high. It's so much fun. And after, for us, our regional competition last year, we actually went to lockdown just a week or two later. And so how have you guys felt about remote competitions, or what's been the biggest challenge for you?
I think remote challenges are, like I stated before, I feel like the meta just isn't as great as it would be in person. Of course, it sticks, vertical intake, and or return rec modifications, and that just it's really dependent on your field this year. If you have a good return rack, it's better than having a good robot. Which is kind of I don't know. It just kind of doesn't feel as good.
I guess what's most different for me about online competitions is how the scouting has changed, because last year that was a huge part, going around the pits, talking to other teams, planning out how you would work in your alliances. And, since, of course, this year we don't have alliances, it's, very different. And then also learning more about your peers is different, because instead of just, casually talking to them during a competition, it's more structured. So, this feels like a more, stripped down version of competitions with less of the flair, but it gets, the essentials out of the way.
Yeah, I feel like presentations, and the pit judging that we do. I guess for context, NorCal FTC has 2 interview sessions. One is the normal presentation and the Q&A. And the other one is strictly a question and answer session just for to emulate judges going to your pits. I feel like that aspect it's been infinitely harder. Being able to work with your teammates to do these answers and have like a presentation that flows well. It's been really hard.
Yeah, especially trying to figure out who needs to talk when. I think that's been so difficult on Zoom, because normally you can kind of do the small physical gestures or be like, oh, I'm gonna talk next, and you can kind of tell. But I feel like Zoom, and that's something that happens even when you're maybe doing a presentation in class or something. It's just so hard to figure that out. I totally agree. And I think one other thing that I've also seen a lot of discussion about that I think will be interesting to discuss here is that the actual competition matches for the robot. And so the policy, at least in Northern California, is each team records 6 competition matches using a randomizer and an official first software. And then you submit those 6 matches, and the cumulative score is what determines your cumulative score is what determines your official competition placement. And when I say you record your matches, I actually mean you just record the score. So the actual video recording aspect of it is technically optional, but the organization that runs Northern California, FTC, has basically asked teams to indicate that they want to comply with this thing called fair play, which is where you basically say that you're going to upload those match videos and you're going to be gracious, professional, and honest in everything that you do. And that's an indication for the team whenever you're registering. You can tell which teams have complied with fair play. But I think that with gracious professionalism being the core tenet of FIRST, it has been really interesting to see how teams have been following that policy of randomization. And I think for the most part, everyone has been quite honest about it, which is really cool to see. But I think it can also be really tempting and really frustrating when you have a really bad match and you kind of just want to delete it and start over again, which is something you're not usually afforded in competition. So I know this can get to kind of a controversial topic, but what are you guys' hot takes on that?
I mean, remote play is just less exciting. Because, I don't know, in-person competitions are just a lot more fun because you could go around and actually look with your own eyes at the other person's robot. But now, you really can't. I'm wondering how PD's freaking turret works, but I can't go up to it and see it, can I? So of course things like that is generally worse, I think. But yeah, remote play is just kind of controversial at times, because of course some teams don't post their match vids, and you're just wondering, oh, what are they doing? But still, it's just, I feel yeah, having no refs for the actual thing was just a bad call for FIRST, I think. But of course, I get that it's hard for them to actually get people and look through the vids and stuff like that, and it's hard for them to mandate. But I feel in Northern California, it should be they should be able to do. But I don't know.
I feel I'm glad that I think most of the top teams in the competition so far, which have been have posted really high scores and are advancing through the robot game, are actually part of fair play. So I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, I think fair play is kind of the best of a bad situation, because when you're in a position where you have to just post scores, rather than having a ref or anyone watch and score it neutrally, it's good to have an official pledge that encourages teams to post their videos and be honest about their scores, because I think most teams do believe in gracious professionalism, and they do agree with it. They don't just say it. So when FIRST officially asks for honesty through fair play, I think it's very effective, and it helps rather than not having it.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I think one of the biggest points of controversy about this whole thing is the scoring of penalties, because I think the really interesting thing about penalties is that a lot of teams, they recognize penalties when they're practicing. They just say, oh, that's a penalty, but very few teams, when they're running practice matches or something, will score their penalties. And so I think it's really difficult to identify that, oh, at this exact moment, that is a penalty, and that is going to cost us, the number of points for a major penalty or something. And obviously, a lot of teams haven't been scoring penalties, and for a lot of teams, they haven't been making penalties either. And so it's been completely fair game. But I don't know, how do you guys feel when you see teams and maybe you think that they should get a penalty for something, but you can't really tell because obviously match videos are not like the real thing, or maybe a really high score is posted and you're not sure about scoring penalties.
Score penalties this year, I think it's pretty hard, especially because a lot of the rules are vague, especially regarding what you can do with the return rack just sitting in front of it. Especially the form rulings are like very vague on that. So I know they have clarified a bit, but it's still like in that gray area. But when you see teams just in wet matches and they're having penalties and they score pretty high, I guess that just kind of feels bad because when those penalties get so extreme that they definitely would have ranked a lot lower, and some other teams would have ranked higher, and they might have advanced to those spots. That just kind of, it's just kind of like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel very good. And I feel like I do know some teams. I won't name any names here, but they should definitely read the game manual more. That's my opinion. But still, penalties is just a lot harder when you don't actually have refs sitting there.
Yeah, and so speaking on that, when you kind of see those match videos and you think, maybe that should have been penalized. I know that there are some other robotics competitions not first affiliated that have been going virtual this year as well, and that have been mandating video recordings for scoring. And so, like, a score is not official unless videos are submitted with it. And I know First didn't do that on the basis of equity, so the argument was that teams might not be able to submit match videos, there might be some kind of bandwidth issue. But I know that there's been a lot of talk and controversy about that because, at least in Northern California, the way you get judged for awards is through Zoom, which does also require a strong internet connection. So, do you guys feel like video recordings should be mandated, or do you think that the system that we have in place right now is the best it can be?
I feel like definitely, like, they could look at it as a more case-by-case basis because, in NorCal, if we're already being judged on over Zoom, which is a very important part of the competition, I think it like really discounts that argument about people not having access to recording their matches, because I think realistically pretty much every team can. So I think like specifically in NorCal it probably should be mandated because it would just make things like for the few teams that might not be following the rules completely, it would just prevent that drama and that inequity.
And then bringing up Alan's point earlier too, where he said that it might be difficult to look through all the match videos, since obviously there's going to be kind of like 4 times as many match videos to look through as there are normally matches because each team is recording separately. So do you feel like there is a way to get around that issue as well? Do you think there's like a large enough volunteer force, or I mean, I think those are like the two major arguments, right? Is the equity issue and then also making sure that people can actually review the videos. So I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I feel like the FTC community is definitely eager, and I think everyone really enjoys watching match videos. So I don't think there will be a problem, like even if you're like sourcing for like having actual FTC people from like a different region screen and watch the videos, and having like videos that are flagged that possibly have penalties being brought up to actual referees which are neutral. I feel like that is definitely a possibility that they can implement.
Yeah, so is that our proposed solution to kind of the fair play discussion, is to outsource match videos to the local FTC community and then bring up all errors or any areas of concern with referees? Is that where we're going to stand on that?
I do feel like that there may be problems with that, as like I know most competitions try to have awards like on the same day, and technically match videos aren't due until like 2 p.m. I believe, of the day of the competition. So while some teams might not actually be able to upload like within those 4 hours, I understand that. So either like delaying awards or pushing back the video filming window might be a possibility to fix that solution.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I think that also brings up that while we are saying that this is kind of where we stand on it, that's also pending kind of the logistics and how feasible everything is. It's not a criticism of First, rather just kind of our suggestion as members of the First community for how some of these issues could be addressed. So Yeah, I think remote competitions has been difficult.
I mean, I think also just like requiring videos and like require them to be like posted will deter a lot of like randomly putting in scores or putting in higher than normal scores than you would get, because that's just like, oh, because they're going to be actually people like reviewing this, and you don't want to get roasted on the Discord because that's yikes. Yeah, first could have required videos because I feel like phones or like recording software or like something that records is like pretty accessible these days.
Yeah, speaking of phones, I guess we do need those to run our robot too, huh? So, again, there's arguments to be made. I think we'll leave that there. But just continuing on that route of competitions, but now talking from maybe a more non-technical perspective, we've talked about how, at least in Northern California, all of our judging and presentations and everything has been on Zoom. But I think that has ended up bringing up some issues, maybe for both judges and also for team members. And so, from maybe a couple of you, like, what do you feel like the biggest challenge has been from online judging presentations?
Yeah. So I feel like the Q&A portion is probably the hardest. Like in an in-person competition, when a judge asks a question, there are physical cues that your team can decide on and give, like stepping forward, or motioning to answer the question. But virtually, I'm sure everyone has experienced this, like in school. Every silence period that you have feels exponentially longer than it really is. So the interviews come off to become really awkward between like both the students and possibly even the judges, and trying to avoid these 5 seconds of silence where person A might think person B is going to answer, and person B thinks person C is going to answer, and so on and so on. I feel like avoiding that time, avoiding all that dead space has been probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, what would you advise to a team that's maybe bringing that up as an issue for them too, where they feel like there's a lot of dead space and they don't really know how to fill it, but also give a proper answer?
Yeah, I feel like definitely doing a lot of presentation practice, and Q&A practice, with mentors if you have them, it would be really, really helpful. That's been really effective for us. It's really helped us cut off our dead space, as not only do we practice answering the questions, we actually build confidence to answer them in the actual competition. And I like working with the 2 sister rookie teams that we have. I feel like doing a lot of presentation practice with them has helped them out a lot.
I think also designating one specific person to actually just talk after a certain amount of time has passed is probably beneficial too, because maybe it's a hardware question, so maybe you just have the hardware lead speak if there's silence for 4 seconds or more, or like software or outreach. This could be applied to like basically all areas. So basically having just designating someone who knows the general area where they like work in to talk after a certain amount of time has passed should be okay, because even BSing it or like just saying random things for just to answer the question is better than like sitting there in silence.
So adding on to what Alan was saying, a strategy that some of our teammates have actually started is they would answer a question like really, really quickly after a judge has asked it. And this, even if like this isn't an area that they're too familiar in, they kind of give a broad overview, allowing for like the people who are more specialized to give a more in-depth answer, and I feel like that's worked fairly well for us.
I think additionally, if any teams want help with their presentation practice or answering questions, you can hit us up. We are open to doing that. So yeah, contact info is on our website.
Or at the end of this podcast. Yeah, stay till the end. I think one other thing too, because Trevor brings up a really good point with practicing, and I think one thing that I definitely underestimated when I was like a freshman on the team and I was, looking forward to competition or whatever, was how much more difficult that Q&A section is than the actual presentation. Because I think that when you're presenting to a judge, you can often just kind of memorize your script. You can really run through it until it feels like it's kind of at the back of your hand, or it's just like you're just playing off the memory at that point. But I think one thing that's really difficult is answering those questions and making sure that you are able to react fast enough, but also give a really good answer. And so I guess my advice personally to a team would be to think about what you're really proud of your team having done. So maybe it's a certain part of your hardware or a certain outreach initiative, and then just answer the judge's question as best as possible, but really make sure you're highlighting the best of your team. Because that's, at the end of the day, what the judges want to hear is just, why should they give you this award? The judge is always there to promote you, not to, make you feel bad or make you look really bad. So definitely do that. And if you're looking for examples of the kind of questions they might ask in Q&A, you can head over to this website called ftcfishconnect.weebly.com. And under the resources tab, there's this thing called Enlightening Elements. And you'll see that there's like a subpage that's all about judging and the presentation and the Q&A section. And so you can go ahead and all the questions are sorted by category. You can run through some of those with your team. You can see examples of the kinds of responses that you might want to give. And then hopefully that'll help you out as well. So yeah, I think that's pretty much our discussion on remote competitions. So obviously it's been a difficult process to navigate, and we've been doing it for a little while now, but hopefully we don't have remote competitions again in the future. But if there are, hopefully our discussion was of help to you. Maybe you learned a thing or two. So the last sub-point, I guess, under FTC switching to COVID is all about the idea of motivation. And so I think this is something that I've definitely talked with a lot of people about with regards to just staying in school. And so it's about staying motivated to maybe keep participating in class and doing your homework on time and keeping your grades up, because it just feels like there's less to look forward to, especially as different really like important events like school dances, like graduation, keep getting canceled and pushed out. And so what do you guys feel like has kept you motivated through COVID to keep participating in robotics and keep doing all this work?
I mean, for me, it was originally, hopefully Worlds is in person and we can go, but I guess it's not an option now. So maybe MTI. I kind of want a third place because I want to raise our rank. Dropping to 11th place on FTC stats is kind of hurts when I probably could have driven better. But yeah.
Yeah, I think from an outreach perspective, in the beginning of the season, we were kind of lost as to how we could do outreach virtually. We've definitely came up with many outreach events, and I feel like some of the outreach events that we've done, like the robotics presentations, have actually been really, really fun, and that's kind of kept team morale up and helped us stay motivated.
For me, I think it's been a combination of a bunch of things, including like what you guys were saying. A big thing was just like, hoping that at least one competition this season would be in person. So like that drove me to like want to get, contribute to get our team, qualified and not, out before that happens. So I'm still like, optimistic and hopeful about MTI and the Discord competition. And then also like, I'm a junior, so I still like intend on doing FTC next year. So, even though this season's online, I'm still like learning a lot, and it's like helping me kind of make sure like I know what I'm doing a little bit more next year.
Yeah, Trevor, I know you're a kind of big management guy here, and you talked about all those outreach events that are really keeping you motivated. And so I think for a lot of teams, keeping outreach this year has been really difficult because a lot of us rely upon maybe doing robot demonstrations somewhere or interacting with other people so that we can spread the ideas of FIRST and everything that we do and share that with the local community. And so how has transitioning all that to a virtual format been for you? And do you feel like it maybe was more motivating last year, or do you feel like it was, it's had some kind of additional value this year?
Right. I feel like the transition at first was definitely difficult, but I feel like our team has definitely been able to find kind of like the silver linings and make the best out of the situation, like taking advantage of the fact that it's online, and being able to reach more people that aren't just in our local community. And I feel like another thing is people are craving like watching these interactions a lot more. So oftentimes, if you're struggling to find a place to demonstrate your robot, you could ask like the local school, elementary school or library. And chances are they are looking for events for their students. For example, we presented at our local elementary schools, one of their assemblies. And I feel like that one in particular was really rewarding because the students there have been cooped up inside for, I think, at the time of when we did the presentation, it was like 10 months. And we did the presentation in January, so like reopening schools back then still seemed like a long way out. So them being able to like see kind of our team work and actually we like building the robot that we built in person, I feel like they really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. I think like at least on the outreach side, it was really hard at first, but we have like, I suppose, benefited a little bit from the pandemic in that for certain activities we've like expanded our scale to and like the way we reach out to a way that I don't think we would have like thought of as quickly if we were in person. Like, now like when we're looking for new outreach opportunities, we're not only reaching to people we can drive to, but also, or can drive to us, but also like people in different states and even like around the world sometimes. I don't think we would have done that had we not been at home and over Zoom.
Yeah, so let's say in some terrible turn of events, next year's season's also virtual. So for context, I'm a senior this year, so I'm graduating. So I won't be able to compete, but since the rest of you guys are not, how is that going to feel to you if you hear that next year's season's virtual? How is that going to change maybe how you approach the season or what you choose to do?
Well, hopefully it's not, because honestly, as a junior, well, as a senior next year, since Worlds is canceled this year, next year might be my last chance to go to Worlds, and I kind of want to go. So especially if Worlds is like remote next year, that's kind of just like a huge bummer. But like I feel like the way we've done things this year is pretty good. Our focus on CAD, our focus on virtual outreach, that could definitely be continued. But still, another remote season, like it just sounds terrible.
I think there's like a lot of potential for next year because hopefully we'll have we'll be back to normal the way we were last year, being able to come into the room a lot more and actually like work together in person. But I think we might be able to like even improve from last year in that like this year we've learned a lot more about like managing our time and using it to the best of our ability because of the limits we've had this year. So next year I think hopefully we'll be back in person, but also like far more effective with those in-person hours. So it has potential to be like a really good season. And I too would very much like to go to Worlds before graduating. So I'll be working towards that.
Yeah, I think pivoting this a little bit to kind of our last point, we're just talking about maybe what have we learned from this pandemic from a specifically FTC standpoint, or maybe even just in general, if you have some like big thing that you realized or that you were able to do. And so I know I've heard a lot about maybe efficiency or about being able to expand the scope of our outreach because we're virtual, but maybe going kind of like a round table. What have you guys felt like you were able to maybe get out of the season in a positive way that you'll be able to implement whether or not next year is virtual or in person?
I suppose I've like learned to be a little bit more resourceful with the way I contribute to the team this year because last year the majority of what I did was working on the robot in the room, but since this year that's been restricted, I've found more ways to do things and find new opportunities. So I think next year that'll definitely help me out in becoming like a little bit more of a dynamic member.
Yeah, I guess from an outreach and management perspective, I think one thing that myself and our entire team has learned is taking advantage of the situations and making the best out of it. Right, because next year nobody knows when everything is going to come back to normal, right? Chances are we won't be able to have our full normal meeting scheduled next year. Chances are robot demonstrations with like a robot controller that other people will be constantly touching. chances are that's not going to be happening. But I feel like our team has definitely taken advantage of the situation and what we've had to do this year. And I feel like kind of taking the same mentality and bringing that into next year, I feel like that's something that we could definitely do.
For me, I definitely think this season has helped me improve in a lot of areas. Think because of like the extensive practice we do, I definitely answered a lot of judging questions better now, which is great. Being able to come up with answers up on the spot is something that will probably be a lifelong skill. I'll probably need it for like job interviews, college interviews. But I also think a lot of technical skills has increased. A lot of technical skills of mine has increased, of course. Spending a lot of my time CADing and doing stuff like that has been really helpful in terms of actually producing something that works. But as others have spoken, being resourceful is definitely also one of them. And just being open-minded to things that might seem a bit jank at first, but could work. Like our robot, I don't know, a lot of the things we have done at first seem like, oh, like the thing we would stop with at first would have definitely been a better option to like, or it would have seemed like a better option, but like the janker option actually works better. So I think being resourceful, of course, stuff like that. And like, it just has helped a lot.
Yeah, I think for me, the one thing that I would add on is kind of communication in a way, because I think we really took advantage of being able to meet in person in the sense that people could hop in and out. You could just kind of tell whoever's around to do work. But I think one thing that's really changed with COVID is that most of us haven't seen each other in person since last March. And so that means that we can't actually, the team won't function if just the four of us that are meeting in person are the only ones doing anything. And so it's been really important. I know it was at first kind of difficult for me because I'm not maybe the best at communication all the time, but it's definitely been a big learning point to make sure that as a team we're able to communicate with each other through some, have some kind of good organizational structure, that we're still delegating work, that we're maybe meeting more on Zoom one-on-one if people are doing smaller projects. And I think that's been really cool, is just to really establish all these forms of virtual communication that are definitely going to be really helpful in the future. And I think that if y'all are interested, we can talk a lot more about that on a future episode of the podcast, but we are coming up on probably about 45 minutes at this point. So I think we'll end it off here. Thank you guys so much for listening to this pilot edition of the CephaloPOD. I really hope you got something out of it and that you enjoyed getting to listen to this. If you want to contact us, you can reach us at our website at msetcuttlefish.weebly.com. You can email us at msetcuttlefish6165@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at mset6165 or Twitter at 6165cuttlefish. You can check out some of our match videos and our other content on YouTube at youtube.com/c/msetcuttlefish6165, or if you just search up msetcuttlefish FTC in the search bar. And finally, you can check out our Fish Connect mentoring site at ftcfishconnect.weebly.com. Again, this is the 6165 MSET Cuttlefish in Northern California, and thank you so much. That this was of interest to you. If you want to contact us, you can find our website at msetcuttlefish.weebly.com, and our email address is msetcuttlefish@. What the hell's our social media?
Yeah, our email is msetcuttlefish6165@gmail.com.
And then our Instagram is mset6165. What's our Twitter? I'm writing this down. Hold on.
Don't contact us on Twitter.
Should I just not say we have a Twitter then?